Hi, I'm Diane, your host of Epic Conversations. And today our guest is Ken Davis. Ken is a local businessman who spends his free time teaching others about the U.S. Constitution. So you're in for a real treat. So Ken, thank you so much. I'm glad that you could come join us on the show.
I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Oh, you're welcome. And before we start our episode on the Declaration of Independence, great way to start, I want to bring attention to this picture in the background. It's called the First Prayer in Congress. And this is these gentlemen in the Congress praying September 7th, 1774. And this is a serious matter here. But please tell us the story. You know why these men are praying.
Well,
what happened?
Yeah, I mean, they actually always open Congress in prayer. Oddly enough, right? They
in
did
17.
Yes, back in the first Congress, they opened every session in prayer. But there was a point whereas they were trying to put together the Constitution, the first Constitution. There was a lot of arguing, right? People weren't agreeing. We've got 13 different countries all trying to come together as one nation. And so there was, if you're in Virginia, you want one thing. If you're in New York, you want a different thing. And so there's a lot of wrangling and arguing that was going on. And Benjamin Franklin, who happened to be the elder statesman, right? He was the oldest gentleman in the first Congress, gives this really impassioned speech where he quotes, in essence, about 13 different scriptures.
Wow.
Right, so I always find it interesting that we're told that Benjamin Franklin was an atheist, but clearly an atheist who knew the scripture. I don't know how many atheists know the scripture, but there you have it. And so he gives this impassioned speech, and he really talks about, near the end of this speech, he talks about the fact that before the revolution, whenever we came together, we prayed and we sought wisdom, if you will, from God. Now do we believe at this point that we don't need this great piece of wisdom, that we don't need this arbiter, if you will, of wisdom? And so then they decide as a group, they actually walk to a local church that's on federal ground, again, oddly enough. They walk to church, they listen to a sermon, they go back into prayer, and then they come back and they end up hammering out all these issues over the next handful of months, hammering out all these issues that they could not, in their own power and wisdom, figure out. So it's pretty amazing.
That is a revelation. They sought God, they sought His wisdom, they knew they couldn't do it on their own, and the fact that there were so many of them, different states, different views, and they came together.
Yeah.
One God, one nation, under God.
Absolutely.
Wow. Indivisible.
That's right.
With liberty and justice for all. Awesome.
And it may as well be a prayer. Yes, absolutely.
Great. Well, let's hear about the Declaration of Independence.
So the Declaration of Independence obviously happens long before this occurred. It's the document in which we broke away from Great Britain. Really, the problem I see today is too often we want to separate the Declaration from the Constitution. But it is almost impossible to do that. And I said it because there are several grievances that are in the Declaration that they use the Constitution to answer.
Okay, tell us.
Yeah. And I don't want to, most people have heard the beginning of the Declaration, right? So people recognize what it is that was being said there and how we kind of went against tyranny. But here's a great one.
Here's an example.
So he is called, and they're referring to the King of England at the time. He's called together legislative bodies at places unusual and uncomfortable and distant from the depository of the public records. So the king would actually forced them to meet in a place that was either far from where they could quickly pull records and things of that nature.
And this is in Britain.
No, this was in the United States, because remember, these were colonies.
Oh, okay.
Right? So the king of England was over the colonies.
Colonies, okay.
Right. So then they said in the Constitution, they took that and they declared there will be a place, a determined place that Congress must meet at least once every year. So that was their solution. That's in the Constitution against sending them somewhere that was uncomfortable. Right? He would basically, and they go on to talk about how being in these places where it would basically lend to more stress. It would make it difficult for them to make decisions. Again, because they were so far away from everything they needed, information, documents, in order to make these decisions. And the king was requiring that because he didn't want them making up laws and rules for themselves. He was the king and he wanted to remain the king.
Mm-hmm. That is tyranny.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, in the Declaration it talks about at what point, it's referring to the point in which men should throw off tyranny.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, at what point do we say enough?
Yeah.
God.
So may I give you another?
Yeah,
Okay.
Give me another one.
Sorry, age. Getting older is not fun. So he's endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the condition of new appropriations of lands. So there we're talking about immigration, right? Hot topic today.
Yes, it is a
hot topic today. But the king was actually making it difficult for others to migrate to these 13 colonies because he didn't want the population to grow. Obviously, the larger they became, probably the more likely they would try to secede or break away from the king.
So the king wanted control.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, in the Constitution, they lay out that Congress shall make laws governing how naturalization into the United States would occur.
So that's like we, the people, we, the Congress, as elected officials, we as the people elect them. They represent us.
Correct.
So it's more of a representation of the people rather than a dictator for one king.
Yeah, and you have to understand that the King of England was also the head of the church. Right? We'll get into that in another session, but the King of England was also the head of the church. And so they needed, there was tyranny virtually in every phase of their life as colonists.
Okay, I don't remember this in grade school. This is good. Okay, tell us more.
All right, let's do another. All right. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. Now, there's actually two grievances I just read.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, here's the Constitution, how it answers that. So first, we don't have a standing army. And I realize most people don't know this because it would appear we have a standing army. But we don't. Every 2 years, our army has to be refunded, meaning every 2 years, Congress has to again fund our military. So it is not a standing army. If they fail to fund it, we no longer have a military.
But have they never stopped funding it?
No.
They've decreased funding, increased funding, depending on who's in office, but they've never not funded it, but they could.
They could. And if they did, and that, so going hand in hand with the next point about civil powers, that is the reason again. So our president is commander in chief. He is in charge. A civilian is in charge of our military. They didn't want a king in charge of it. So
that's a check and balance.
Or another military figure being in charge of the military. Because if If not, the military, in essence, could then bring about a coup against the government, right? So you don't put a military head of the country or in charge of the military. You put a civilian. And so again, these are grievances they had. They responded to them in the Constitution.
Now that required some wisdom, because I see that clearly as a check and balance. Like in accounting, that's my profession is. There's debits, credits, but there's accountability, and there's a check and balance, so that it's not just one person who counts the money and hides it. And, it's like, no, you need to have a balance, somebody else outside that's not part of. So that's an excellent check and balance.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
That's good.
All right, one more.
Let's do one more.
So let's do one more.
All right.
Maybe two, depends on which. All right, okay. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislature. And I'm sorry. I just did that one. I'm going to do this last one. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. So during the early times of the colonies, the king would actually require people to basically house and feed people in the military. That's what quartering is referring to. And so... And even in times of peace. So it didn't matter if there was a time of war, a time of peace, these folks, and the reason was to keep an eye on the people, to make sure that they're not breaking any laws, from any edicts from the king. So quartering of soldiers, again, specifically responded to in the Constitution. There will be no quartering of soldiers in times of peace.
In times of peace, because the military does provide housing, don't they, for the military?
So have you ever seen the movie Red Dawn?
I can't say.
So it's I think it was in the early '80s. They actually they redid it recently. I think in the last 6 or 7 years. Red Dawn, but in the Red Dawn, it is a movie about Russia. I think the original one had Russia invading the United States. The more recent one, I believe, had China invading the United States. Here's the truth. If China or some Islamic nation invaded the United States, if I am not out there fighting, I want a soldier in my house. I want, and Red Dawn kind of approaches that, is having this kind of militaristic response within our own nation to an invasion.
Protect ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm not fighting, I want someone in my house that is trained to help me defend my home.
Yeah. That's awesome. Are there any others?
Oh no, I think people get the point.
They get the point.
They get the point. You go and take a look at the grievances, and if you're so inclined, take 20 minutes, read through the Constitution, and you'll see where many of those grievances were answered.
So the Constitution answers the grievances they had, and the Declaration of Independence is the prelude for this.
Absolutely.
That is just powerful. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us. We have more episodes coming up with Ken, who's going to teach us more about the U.S. Constitution, so stay tuned. And if you're enjoying these episodes, please subscribe to this channel and share it with a friend. In the meantime, have an epic day in the Lord.